At the foot of an enormous sequoia tree surrounded by smaller plants. Text, Sequoia National Park. Clouds sweep over the ridge of a mountain. Text, Haleakala National Park. Forested mountains bathed in golden light. Text, Shenandoah National Park. Person stands on an overlook, gazing out at a series of bays and inlets at sunset. Text, Acadia National Park.
Wallace Stegner said that national parks are the best idea we ever had. Absolutely American and absolutely democratic, and they reflect us at our best rather than our worst, and I think he was right.
Sunset over wide, tranquil bay with tree outcropping. Text, Biscayne National Park. Majestic snow-covered mountain. Text, Yosemite National Park. Hiking in the park.
In the National Park Service, we have an inventory and monitoring program that's tasked with monitoring specific and important natural resources in the park.
A scientist drops monitoring equipment into water.
So inventory and monitoring can be kind of technical terms. What does that even mean in a natural landscape? But they're hugely important to us as the people responsible for taking care of this place.
Scientist hikes up a hillside pulling measuring tape behind him. Another pulls a mesh trap out of the water.
So the first inventory is just that question of what's even here? That's a great question, and one that we hadn't really dealt with before the inventory program came along. What plants are here? What animals? How many? Where? How has that changed over time?
Text, Christy Brigham, Chief of Resource Management, Sequoia National Park. Scientist pulls a measuring tape over rocky terrain.
And that change over time gets us into monitoring. So we're responsible, our legislation says that we have to preserve these places unimpaired for future generations.
Scientists measuring small plants in rocky landscape. The air is full of dense mist.
We call our program the Vital Signs Monitoring Program because it's like monitoring vital signs in humans.
Measuring plants in a forest and seaweed on rocks.
For example, we monitor blood pressure, pulse rate, your body temperature, cholesterol levels, your blood chemistry, in order to understand what are the baseline values for an individual or a population, and then when are those values going outside what you would consider normal, and when you need to be concerned, when you might need to actually do something about it.
A scientist steps off of a boardwalk to take measurements in a wetland. Text, Alice Chung McCowbry. Program Manager, Klamath Network, Inventory and Monitoring Program. A frog perched on a mound of dirt.
So that's essentially what we do for park resources, plant communities, animal communities, understanding physical habitat and environmental conditions.
A frog jumps across a bright green plant leaf. A scientist wearing a headlamp and hard hat takes measurements inside a cave full of ice.
We work with parks all across the country and provide them the information that they need to care for these special places.
Text, Tom Rodhouse, Ecologist, Upper Columbia Basin Network, Inventory and Monitoring Program.
We can be found monitoring aquatic life in places like Haleakala National Park in Hawaii. We can be found in the heart of Washington, D.C., monitoring the forest there in Rock Creek Park.
Scientists wrap a yellow tape measure around the circumference of a large tree trunk.
We can be found in the dark rivers flowing through Mammoth Cave National Park, monitoring the rare and endangered Kentucky cave shrimp, an aquatic organism that can be found nowhere else in the world.
The Kentucky cave shrimp, a translucent crustacean, swims in blue water above rocks.
While we are monitoring rocky intertidal zones in Acadia National Park in Maine, at that same time, over 3,000 miles away, we have people monitoring rocky intertidal zones in Cabrillo National Monument in California.
Using a wire screen to count seaweed on tidal rocks. Text, Gettysburg National Military Park. Forest monitoring. Tall, straight, green-leaved trees extend up into the sky. Scientists take notes on a section of ground cover marked off with a square grid. Text, Liz Matthews, botanist.
So our monitoring is tracking forests for the long term so that we can see those changes in trees that are not going to happen in 10 years, 20 years, or a human lifespan.
A scientist measures the circumference of a small tree trunk. His partner records data on a portable computer.
One component of our forest monitoring is tracking the number of seedlings and small trees in the forest. And until recently, it was pretty bleak. In some parks, we saw few or no seedlings or small trees at all.
A forest with trees of many sizes. Text, Ken Fearby, Natural Resource Specialist, Rock Creek Park.
Well, you know, man has removed all the natural predators that deer would have in a park setting, such as wolves, mountain lions, even bears.
The doe walks through a bed of ferns, grazing as she moves.
That's led to overpopulation.
Deer are an important part of our forest ecosystems in the Mid-Atlantic until there are too many of them.
A deer grazes on the tall grass.
We've had to step in and create a management option And our management option is to remove some of the deer. We want deer in the park, they're part of the ecosystem.
A herd of deer at sunset.
But we need to reduce the numbers so that we can reduce the impacts.
A large tree trunk surrounded by smaller trees and saplings. Text, Becky Lonkeski, biologist, Catoctin Mountain Park.
Since we started deer management, we've definitely seen more tree seedlings, you could even call it a flush of tree seedlings.
Moving down a foliage-lined forest path. Text, yellow-fringed orchid.
We've found plants that haven't been found for sometimes decades in the park. We had never found the yellow-fringed orchid before 2 years ago.
The yellow-fringed orchid, a flower with many tiny parts shooting off a central green stalk.
So 9 years ago, you would not have seen this tree seedling here.
She kneels and points to the green leaves of a small ash tree that grows near the ground amid leaf cover.
This little ash would have definitely been eaten by deer.
And the small trees are really important because those are our future big canopy trees. It's the future of the forest.
Sunlight filtering through the green forest canopy. A fox stands in a field of tall brown grass. Text, Channel Islands National Park. Monitoring island fox.
When this park decided that one of its vital signs was to manage the island fox, to look at the top dog on the island and see what was its health.
Text, RUSSEL GALIPEAU, Superintendent, Channel Islands National Park.
And they started inventorying, monitoring program on that particular species, and what they learned in a very short period of time, that fox was on the decline. What are we going to do? Are we going to lose a species that exists only on the Channel Islands that will be gone forever? Or are we going to intervene? And it was inventory and monitoring that told us you had to do something. The flag went up saying something was broken. And I am proud to tell you today, after monitoring of that particular species, it led to captive breeding of that species. It resulted in the reestablishment of bald eagles on the Channel Islands. Putting that whole package together, we went from an endangered species, the island fox in 2004, to being the fastest recovery of a mammal in the history of the Endangered Species Act, removed from the Endangered Species Act in 2016. All foxes are back in the wild and they're doing well.
Foxes running through tall brown grass. Two scientists perch on a high, rocky cliff overlooking the blue ocean. One uses a scope to observe seals in the distance. Text, Point Reyes National Seashore. Elephant seal monitoring. Several seals lounge on a sandy beach. Text, Cicely Muldoon, Superintendent, Point Reyes National Seashore.
So understanding the ecology of national parks is vital to what we do. It's vital to what I do as a park manager. When I'm making decisions about how we're going to manage the park, how we plan for the future, how we ensure these animals are here for future generations to enjoy, understanding what's going on the ground with the wildlife is absolutely critical, and that's what inventory and monitoring does for us.
A scientist walks along the beach, counting seals as they lie on the shore. Brook trout swim in water. Text, Shenandoah National Park. Monitoring brook trout.
I think inventory monitoring is critical in national parks. We don't have a lot of data to tell us the long-term trends.
A scientist kneels on a stream bank beside 3 buckets. He measures the length of a fish using a ruler on a piece of wood. Another scientist records data on a clipboard. Text, Jim Chaverl, Chief of Natural and Cultural Resources, Shenandoah National Park.
And that's what national parks are about, the long view. And so if we don't have data sets that go across decades, we won't really understand the up and down fluctuations of a species, of a metric, that we will with long-term monitoring, and that's critical to have as a manager.
He picks the fish up and releases it back into the stream. Text, Woody Smeck, Superintendent, Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Park.
It's worth it. It's not only worth it, it's indispensable. I don't think we can be effective managers and stewards and fulfill our responsibility without that kind of data. It's such an awesome mission.
A scientist measures the circumference of a massive tree trunk amid rocks. Text, Sequoia National Park. Monitoring high elevation forests.
And I feel a heavy sense of responsibility to ensure that what we offer to the public here, what belongs to the public, is sustained in good health. And we want to invest our effort in things that are truly going to make a difference in the preservation of these great landscapes.
Trees in a sharply sloped mountain meadow. Behind them, thick green forests and sharp mountains peaks in the distance. A snow-capped mountain above a green forest. Stars sparkle in the sky. The scene is mirrored in a clear lake at the base of the forest. Text, the National Park Service has developed a long-term ecological monitoring program for 32 ecoregional inventory and monitoring networks supporting more than 270 parks with significant natural resources. The monitoring program assists park managers in developing a broad-based understanding of the status and trends of park resources as a basis for making decisions and working with other agencies and the public for the long-term protection of park ecosystems.